Hey and welcome to my channel where I experiment with different materials and techniques. In this video I'm making a Viking Age inspired leather pouch. As always, we start with the design and the patterns. I wanted to make a somewhat historically accurate bag, but it turned out to be more difficult than what I expected. We don't have many well-preserved leather specimens from that era, and it's often difficult to say what the items might have looked like in the original form. A lot of the metal parts belonging to the bags have been found though, so we can at least assume how some of these bags were shaped, but I'm not going to use any metal parts for my bag this time. According to some sources, Vikings used cow, sheep, pig, goat and deerskin, but some sources say that we haven't done much testing on the findings, so we don't have a proper understanding whether the Vikings actually preferred using domestic animal hides or if wild animal hides were more popular, as they seem to be in Finland at the time. Here I'm using something that was just labeled as 100% genuine leather, which could possibly be from a cow. I have no idea how this leather was tanned, but you might want to use vegetable tanned leather as it is durable, easy to work with, and period appropriate. Here I've traced the pattern on the leather with a leather groover, but a pencil or any other thin object would work for that too. I then used an X-Acto knife to cut the pieces out. Once all the pieces are cut out, I'm chiseling the holes in where I want to stitch the pieces together. Starting with the strap that will work both as a belt loop and as something that keeps the bag closed, I'm measuring where I want to attach the other end of it in order to create the belt loop. I want there to be a bit of slack so that when I attach the bag on my belt, it will hang a bit lower. This also allows me to attach the bag to a wider belt if necessary. I'm using a leather chisel with 4 teeth and a mallet to punch through the strap and the back piece of the bag simultaneously. This way I get the stitches to the exact place I want. Then I'm cutting the hole for the loop and measuring out a piece of leather that is long enough to become the loop. I decided to cut out a piece that was about half an inch longer on both sides of the hole. Then I marked where the hole would meet the front piece of the bag. I used this marking as a guide when I punctured holes for the stitches. I then used a stitching groover to mark an identical distance from the edge on the front, back, and the side pieces of the bag. I then used a leather chisel to punch holes for the stitches. Here it helps to use a chisel with more teeth on straight lines and one with less teeth when you're on a curved line. To keep the holes equally apart from each other, place 1 or 2 of the teeth into an already punched hole. Before sewing the pieces together, I wanted to try my hands on leather carving. I sketched a design I wanted on a piece of parchment paper and wet the leather pieces. Once the pieces had turned into their original color, they were ready to be carved on. While the way we carve leather nowadays is fairly modern, marking wet leather has been around since the Roman era. I wasn't sure how common it was for Vikings to mark leather until I found out that at least one leather strap found with a sword had been decorated with a pressed spiral pattern. The symbol I'm carving is the loop square, or in Finnish hannun vaakuna. While it's not necessarily a Viking symbol, it was used quite widely in Northern Europe, and especially in Finland, it was carved on various everyday items to ward off bad spirits. I traced the symbol using a ballpoint tracing stylus, and then with a swivel knife I carved along the lines. Next, I used a small metal leather stamp to stamp around the edges. You can see what the head of the tool looks like in the image I put in the corner. This tool helps to press down the leather around the symbol to make it look more beveled. The same tool also gives a slightly textured shadowing, but to me it looked a bit too flat, so I wanted to add some detail. I used this fan-shaped stamp to make the symbol look like rays of light were beaming off of it. The leather I'm working on looks to be a lot stiffer and drier than the leather I see other people carve on, although this was sold as being ideal for carving. You should use vegetable tanned full grain leather, as the vegetable tan will allow the leather to soften when it gets wet, and full grain will hold the design after the leather has dried. Like I mentioned earlier, I do not know how this leather was tanned, but I still managed to get some stamping to stay on the leather. Then, unfortunately, some of my footage got lost, so I can't show you how I attached the strap and the loop, but I used the exact same stitch that I'm using here to attach the front and the back to the side. Here I'm using 2 needles, one on each end of the thread. I'm pulling the thread through the pieces so that the middle of the string is centered with the stitch hole. Then I'm alternating the stitches by first going in one hole and coming back from the next hole. With the other needle, you want to go through the hole that the first thread went through and then go through the next hole. You alternate this with both needles so that the thread goes through all the holes from both sides. This is called saddle stitching, and if you find it difficult to understand from my video, you can easily find other videos illustrating this technique. Some people say that since the first leather saddle traces back to 365 AD, it could be argued that the saddle stitch has evolved since that time. However, since I couldn't find any preserved examples of seams from the Viking era, I can't really say how historically accurate this stitching method is. I'm using it here because it's a very strong and neat looking stitch. Once you're finished with the seam, stitch back a couple of times and melt the ends with a lighter. Note that this only works with synthetic thread, so if you're using something period appropriate, do not try this or you will just end up burning your seam. I cut out any extra leather that didn't line up with the seam and then proceeded to wet the back and give it a bit of shaping. Now that the seams were wet from the water, I also tried to burnish them. Burnishing means to apply friction on the seam in order to give it a slick appearance, but it also helps to seal the leather pieces together. Here I'm using a wood burnisher to rub the seams with. I also tried to use some fine sanding paper on the seams earlier, but in my opinion it just made the leather stick up more, while the goal was to smooth everything as much as possible. I tried a piece of canvas too, but it seemed to make things worse. I then resulted in stealing my husband's mustache wax that has beeswax as a primary ingredient and spread that on the seam. That seemed to work a lot better, although I wasn't sure if I could have achieved a better result with a different kind of leather or if I just need to work on my technique still. I then applied the beeswax on all the edges. And here's the finished result. I hope you found this video helpful, and if you did, don't forget to like the video and leave a comment. Next time I will show you how I made this fur mantle and the tablet woven belt, so if you're interested, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notifications for my videos. Thank you for watching and happy crafting!